pleased to say that the Shadow Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, is here. Always a pleasure to see you. Thanks
Good morning.
for taking the time. I don't know if you're probably travelling Marina Litvinenko, whose husband was killed, as you know, Alexander Litvinenko, back in 2006, poisoned by the Russian regime. She's been on the show this morning saying there is absolutely no doubt who is responsible for Alexander Alexei Navalny's death. What should the British government do about it?
Well, look, we've no doubt about the nature of Putin's regime. We saw what he did on our own soil with that chemical weapons attack in Salisbury. We know the way that Putin treats his political opponents, and we know that the forthcoming elections are likely to be a sham by contrast to the standards that democracies apply to the conduct of their elections. We've, in this country, taken a united and robust response in relation to Russia, but where we've urged the government to go further is by implementing all of the recommendations of the cross-party Russia report that came before the House of Commons. We're concerned still by the amount of Russian money that washes through the City of London, and we want to see tough sanctions. So, this is one of those areas where, even in election year, we try not to speak with divided voices in the House of Commons. We want our country to speak with a united voice. We've been united in support of Ukraine against Russia. We've been united in condemnation of Putin and his tactics. I think there are probably some areas where the government could go further, and we'd support them in doing so.
How much more tough can sanctions be?
Well, as I say, there's still quite a lot of illicit Russian money washing through the City of London. I think we've got to take a tough line on that, and we've got to work in concert with our allies. And in relation to Russia, I think part of it is not just about what more we should be doing in addition to what we're doing. It's about maintaining the resolve that we already have in relation to supporting Ukraine, for example. There is unwavering support for Ukraine in the House of Commons. That would not change if there's a change of government later this year. But of course, we've got one eye on what's going on in the United States elections, and we've got to maintain European unity in relation to Ukraine as well. So,
but is it game over if they don't get the money from Congress?
Well, look, I actually, as I say, even in an election year, I'm glad that David Cameron was in Washington issuing a very blunt plea to congressional Republicans to support aid for Ukraine. Well, and it's not often I would say this, but if it's a choice between what Marjorie Taylor Greene said or backing David Cameron, I'll support the British Foreign Secretary. He's right, and the Biden administration has been right to provide that support for Ukraine. It has been critical in defending a sovereign country from the unprovoked invasion, and we have been absolutely clear as the opposition party in Britain that we are lockstep with the government in support of Ukraine, and we will maintain that support should Labour win the general election later this year, because Ukraine is fighting for itself and its freedom, but it's fighting for democracy right across Europe, and we can't allow Putin to get away with this idea that he can invade sovereign countries in Europe and get away with it.
When it comes to protection, there will be an election at some stage this year. You then are no longer MPs for the election process. How concerned are you, given what we saw at Tobias Ellwood's house last week, and we've seen previously with Jo Cox and others, that politicians like you are vulnerable?
I've been an MP for 9 years, and in that time, 2 members of Parliament have been killed. So I don't take this lightly at all. I think that in terms of the general election, whether we're sitting MPs up for re-election or candidates standing for the first time, everyone is entitled to stand in those elections to make their case without fear of intimidation or harassment. And I would draw a strong contrast between those wholly unacceptable, contemptible scenes outside Tobias Ellwood's house, completely unacceptable, and legitimate protests that we've seen outside Parliament or outside town halls in the country. It cannot be right to target politicians in their homes. It's not fair on them, it's not fair on their families, it's not fair on their neighbours.
Have you fallen victim to that as well?
No, I haven't. And, again, I draw a contrast between, those images we can see outside Tobias Ellwood's home and the protests that took place outside my constituency office. I don't agree with the protesters. I think they've been a bit hard on me, but you know, turning up at a weekend when my staff aren't there to make their voice heard, well, OK, fair enough. I don't agree with them, but I defend their right to protest, even where that protest is directed against me. But what we saw outside Tobias Ellwood's home is completely unacceptable.
Lots to canter through. Let me ask you to clarify what we heard from your leader at the weekend, suggesting that Keir Starmer was actually not endorsing an immediate end to the conflict in Gaza. What was he saying?
We want to see a ceasefire, of course we do. And we've been increasingly concerned, as the wider international community has been, with the disproportionate loss of civilian life in Gaza. Of course, Israel has a responsibility to get its hostages back. Every country in the world has a right to defend itself. But I think what we've seen are actions that go beyond reasonable self-defence and also call into question whether Israel has broken international law. And the ICJ are now investigating, and we take all of that seriously. What Keir has sought to do throughout the conflict is to work in lockstep with our allies and friends in the region. Countries like Jordan, Egypt, Qatar have huge agency in this conflict and have been doing an awful lot of diplomatic heavy lifting behind the scenes, as has the United States. And we've sought to conduct ourselves in the way that we would if we were in government. Lots of people are engaging with Labour on the basis that we could be the government later this year, including the world leaders that Keir met over the weekend in Munich at the Munich Security Conference. Has Israel gone too far? Well, I think objectively, yes. Israel has gone too far, and we see that with the disproportionate loss of innocent civilian life. And in this modern age, we see the unfiltered consequences of that on our social media feeds. And who could not be moved by the images of children killed or maimed or injured, as well as other civilians? And so I hope that what we've seen overnight, I gather we've got potentially another turning point in this conflict of the risk of escalation of the conflict into Rafah on the border with Egypt. We think that would be intolerable, unacceptable. We can't have Palestinians pushed into the desert, something that Egypt is now preparing for. What Israel has said is that they won't go into Rafah until, I think, the 10th of March, and they're giving Hamas that window of opportunity to release the hostages, which they should, and maybe, just maybe, that opens the door to a diplomatic end to this conflict, which I think we all want to see.
I want you to go back to your brief, of course. How are you going to ensure that private companies do or don't get involved with tests and scans for patients in order to bring down that backlog?
Well, we've got to this ridiculous situation where the NHS has spent £1 billion in the last 5 years outsourcing scans because we don't have enough of our own scanners, and actually we're paying more and fewer scans are being conducted. So we've got a commitment to double the number of CT and MRI scanners over the course of the Parliament, fully costed, fully funded, and not just more scanners, but AI-enabled scanners, which means we can get more people through more quickly. And, for example, in cases of stroke patients, we think we can treble the number of people who survive stroke without a disability, because we can increase significantly the volume of people coming through. And just imagine what that means for the quality of life, the life chances, and future demands on the health and care system if people can get that diagnosis and get the scan for their stroke faster, get treated faster, and avoid being disabled by stroke. That's what Labour's commitment would do, and it's one of many reasons why we've got to see change in a Labour government after the general election, which, as far as I'm concerned, can't come soon enough.
We're out of time, but which way should Labour voters vote on the 29th of February in the Rochdale by-election?
I'm just glad I don't have to make that choice, and I just want to say I'm really sorry to voters in Rochdale.
Well, what should they do, stay at home?
Look, I don't think I would be casting a ballot. I'd probably go along and spoil my ballot if I lived in Rochdale, and I'm really sorry we put people in that position. I think Keir rightly took the decision that even though nominations are closed and we couldn't remove Azhar Ali from the ballot paper, what he said was so unacceptable that we just said we can't give him our backing. And all I can say to the people of Rochdale is I'm sorry, and Labour's going to give you a better candidate and a better choice at the general election.
So still go, but spoil your ballot paper?
I think that would be one option, but voters can make their own minds up. There are a range of candidates, but I think looking at the range of candidates, they're not being spoilt with choice. And I think Rochdale deserves better, especially when you look at the MP that they just lost, one of the best MPs in Parliament, the late, great Tony Lloyd. And I feel really quite sorry and ashamed that Rochdale voters have been left in this position. And we make no apology for being robust and saying that Azhar Ali might be on the ballot paper, but he's not a candidate that we're supporting or endorsing.
So don't vote for him. OK, it's good to see you, Wes Streeting. Thanks very much indeed.